At least 51 people have been killed and more than 200 others wounded in a Russian strike on central Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky said 2 Russian ballistic missiles hit a hospital and a military training facility in the city of Poltava. It's one of the deadliest strikes carried out by Russian forces since the war began more than 900 days ago. Well, the latest attack came a day after a separate Russian airstrike on a hotel killed an 8-year-old boy and a woman in Zaporizhia. A video released early on Tuesday shows rescue workers lifting up heavy concrete blocks to pull people from a pit at the site of the attack. Well, for more on what's going on in Ukraine, Peter Dickinson joins us live now from Kiev. Hi, Peter. A really significant attack on eastern Ukraine then. First of all, what more can you tell us about it? What more details are coming out?
Well, the death toll, unfortunately, continues to rise. It was initially announced that around 40 had been killed in the strike. That number is now at 51, and there are fears that it could rise significantly higher. The number of injured is approximately 200. And there are reports that there are still people under the rubble at the institute that was struck and the hospital. So there were two institutions that were hit: a communications institute and a hospital, a nearby hospital. So the fears are that death toll will continue to rise. This is part of an escalating air war that we've seen in the last week or so. Russia has picked up its attacks on targets across Ukraine. Many of those targets have been the country's civilian infrastructure, but there have also been attacks on individual institutes and buildings across the country. And Poltava itself, which is the target today, is actually a long way from the front lines and has rarely been targeted before. This is by far the worst attack in Poltava of the war, and indeed one of the worst attacks of the entire war, certainly this year.
And these attacks come amid growing concerns, Peter, in some quarters certainly, about Ukraine's ability to hold its eastern front line. Significant pressure on that front line at the moment. How serious is the situation?
This fighting is very intense at the moment in the Eastern Front. Russian forces are advancing fairly rapidly, certainly more rapidly than they have done for much of the last year or so, towards a very strategically important city, Pokrovsk, which is a logistical hub for Ukrainian forces and for the region. If Russia is able to take that city, it will create opportunities for Russia then to go further in a number of directions and consolidate its hold on eastern Ukraine's Donbass region. Ukraine, of course, is looking to hold off on that. What we're seeing recently, well as fighting in the east, of course, is very much vocal calls from the Ukrainian government for the country's Western partners to lift restrictions on Ukraine's ability to strike targets inside Russia. Now, Ukrainian officials say this is something that is preventing them from undermining Russia's offensive in the east, and it is also something that prevents them from defending themselves against the kind of airstrikes that we've seen today against Poltava.
OK, Peter Dickinson, live for us in Kiev. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to get a little bit more analysis on this story. Let's go to Jeffrey Fisher, who's a retired US Air Force colonel and international security expert, who's joining us live from Vienna. We've been talking over the past few weeks about the risk to Ukraine with it going into Russia at the same time as it facing that intense pressure on the Eastern Front. How do you assess where the war is at right now and who has the upper hand?
Yeah, so Charlotte, that's a great question, right? I think there's not a real clear answer, right? You've got Ukraine taking a significant risk into going into Kursk and moving, and they've covered a lot of ground. Russia has been able to shore up their defenses and slow that advance, but for Ukraine to actually take that offensive and go into Kursk, they had to give up some of their security and some of their defensive lines down in that eastern front that you and your previous the previous gentleman who was speaking had mentioned. So it's tough to figure out who's winning right now. What is very clear is the air war or the air campaign of lobbing missiles at each nation is significantly increasing. Right now, Ukraine has a challenge with that because the U.S. administration has put some political limitations on how far and with what weapons Ukraine can actually strike into Russia.
And we've been hearing just in the last hour, Zelensky asking the Canadian leader, Justin Trudeau, and other Western partners to, back an okay for strikes deeper into Russian territory. You're obviously with an Air Force background. Would that yield significant benefits, do you think, for Ukraine?
Absolutely, 100%, right? And the reason is quite simple. It's extremely hard for Ukraine to stop the drones or the bombers with the bombs falling once they're in the air. But if they can actually, mitigate that risk or eliminate that risk while it's on the ground, strike the bases where the bombers are taking off from, strike the missile launchers and stuff like that, you can eliminate that kill chain at its very first points, right? So it's significant. And there are rumors and rumblings out of Washington, D.C. right now that the United States is fairly close to approving JASSM, which is a long-range strike missile, cruise missile, for Ukrainian use. What's not clear, however, is what limitations the Biden administration would put on that.
Okay, interesting. And Jeffrey, the Ukraine arms chief and 2 other ministers have also tendered resignations. Do you think that's significant in telling us about the feeling of where this war is going, or what insights do you think that gives into what's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and unfortunately, we just don't know enough about it. I think, it was just a few days ago where we learned that that Moonfish, the F-16 pilot, was tragically killed in an accident or some kind of combat operation. It was not due to Russia. The very day after that, you heard that Zelensky had demanded and terminated the air chief from continuing, and we don't know all the details around that either. These resignations could be the potential where, President Zelensky is just not pleased with where the war is going with his leadership. I would say this: I wouldn't read too much into the sacking of generals. As a war historian, I probably couldn't count how many generals President Abraham Lincoln went through during the Civil War. So I think that this, if you're not happy as a leader, you have to take some kind of action and put the generals in place that you want to have there.
Okay, Jeffrey Fisher, thank you so much for joining us on the NewsHour. Appreciate it.